Thanks for joining us once again on One Slot right here on News Central Television. I am Rita Omodia. The African Continental Free Trade Area, that is AfCFTA, is a monumental initiative, making it the largest free trade area globally, encompassing the 55 countries of the African Union and 8 regional economic communities, RECs. With a foresight that AfCFTA will lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty and substantially increase the income of 68 million people are just slight above the poverty line by 2030, comes the question whether this statement by Landry Signer is achievable considering the economical state of most African countries. These thoughts at the back of one's mind necessitates today's discussion where we will be examining what this trade agreement actually entails, what it has achieved so far, and how it can be improved to work towards achieving the purpose it was established for. Stay with us on One Slot for more of this conversation. Now, during the 18th ordinary session of the AU Assembly in Addis Abeba on January 2012, heads of state and government adopted a decision on fast-tracking the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area AfCFTA for boosting intra-Africa trade. Its overarching objective is to establish a unified continental market with a population of approximately 1.3 billion people and a combined GDP of around $3.4 trillion US. The AfCFTA serves as a pivotal project within Agenda 2063, the Africa We Want, the African Union's long-term development strategy aimed at transforming the continent into a global force. The primary mission of the AfCFTA is to eliminate trade barriers and promote intra-Africa trade, focusing on advancing value-added production across all service sectors within the African economy. By doing so, it aims to foster the development of regional value chains, encourage investment and generate employment opportunities. On May 30, 2019, the AfCFTA officially entered into force after 24 member states deposited their instruments of ratification following a series of continuous continental engagement that had been ongoing since 2012. The launch of the AfCFTA took place during the 18th to 12th extraordinary session of the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government held in Niamey, Niger, in July 2019, and trading under the AfCFTA officially commenced on January 1, 2021. Now, joining me for this discussion, we have Oluseji Aino, is a board member for the U.S.-Africa Trade Council. He joins us from Kogi in Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us on One Slot.
Thank you so much for having me, and good evening.
Good evening. It's definitely going to be quite an educating episode on today's One Slot. And we're looking at the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's been widely seen as a crucial driver for economic growth, industrialization, and sustainable development in Africa. So to break it down for us, tell us what exactly is the overview of what exactly AfCFTA exactly entails for Africa.
Again, thank you so much for having me. You know, when you talked about the AfCFTA, which is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, it's basically a pact between the 54 countries, or 54 plus 1 African countries, you know, aimed at creating a single market for the entire continent. And that is the overall aim, you know, to achieve in terms of the goods and services that cut across the entire continent. And then the agreement was signed, like you rightly mentioned at the introduction, sometimes March in 2018. And then it was officially launched in January 2021. You know, however, if you look at the critical objective of African Continental Free Trade Agreement, is basically to increase the intra-African trade, to boost economic growth, and at the same time to create jobs across all the African states, you know, in the entire continent. But so far so good. Some of the key achievements that the agreement has achieved, you know, since inception. And basically, one of the things it has achieved so far include first the establishment of a common set of rules and procedure, which again guides all the member states in terms of how things are done, how things have been implemented, how market is going to be run, and the entire structures around it. The second part of it also is the elimination of tariffs, on 90% of about 90% of the goods and services that are traded within the continent. And lastly, I think one of the critical objectives of that also is the creation of a dispute resolution mechanism, among the member states to ensure that despite, different cultures, backgrounds, and all of the different economic opportunities that we have, we must be able to have a common frontier on how to resolve disputes that may arise from member states. So those are the three critical objectives that I think the agreement has achieved since 2008, and by extension since 2021, that has been fully launched, for the member states to participate.
Definitely a lot of objectives for the AfCFTA. And if we're going back to the establishment of it, I mean, it's bringing back the background of the African Union, which is a continental organization, and talks about the Agenda 2063, that is the Africa we want. So looking at the background and the objectives that you listed so far, where does the African Union come to play in this AfCFTA agenda?
If you look at it from way back in 1999 till early part of 2000, when the entire AU structure was, introduced. If you also look at, the influence of the leaders, including the then President Olusegun Obasanjo, the likes of the late Gaddafi, from Libya, and the rest of them. The whole idea was even beyond trade. It's also to have a single currency, that binds the entire continent together, where we'll be able to present a common force, and be able to reduce the influence or the overbearing influence of the Western community, across the continent. But then if you look at so far so good with the objective I've mentioned, the member states have started to benefit from the trade pact. Many of the countries have had increased trade between African nations, at least has so far been observed. If you also look at the economies of the member states, they have also, improved significantly, and they are also expected to improve beyond what it is at the moment. And in terms of the significant benefits, the agreement has actually helped the countries to be able to implement, in terms of the core structures and objectives of the agreement. However, there are still quite a number of issues and skirmishes around, the early days implementation, and it's still taking time to see the full impact, of the AfCFTA on the economies of the individual nations, because there are other internal factors, that are responsible for the full implementation and perhaps the impact of the agreement across different nations of the continent. So not much has been achieved, but gradually, structures and systems are being put in place to begin to activate all of those opportunities, across all the continents. Across the continent, does it?
Before we go deeper into why exactly that's not achieved much, I mean, it's been 2 years since the official launch in January 2021. But before AfCFTA, we have regional economic communities. I mean, look at COMESA, look at the East African community. Why is AfCFTA so important? And does this replace the role of regional economic communities that we have in Africa?
Okay, so let's take a breather and let's take a backward integration. Let us look at the SADC, for example, the South African region. When you mention South Africa, basically people look at South African economy, as an entity without consideration for some other states, Zambia, Gambia, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and a host of other countries within the SADC region. What AfCFTA seems to achieve is to, in a way, eliminate all of those issues around regional, dominance of a particular country over others. So, for example, if you look at Nigeria within the West African region, Nigeria is quite huge. The population is huge, and if such an agreement that is mutually beneficial to all of the other states or member states within the ECOWAS, region, for example, then you will see more dominance from a particular country more than the other. So if Nigeria decided to flood the entire West African region with all of our goods, then there is nothing they will be able to bring in here, all things being equal. But however, the reverse is the case, because we tend to import more things, from the neighboring countries because of tariff issues, because of custom issues, and then you see some rice coming in from Cotonou. You see vehicles coming in from Cotonou that are quite cheaper than what you have in Nigeria here. So these are the internal factors that are affecting, each of the countries and making it very difficult for that trade to happen. So the impact has not much been felt, but it is expected that in the next couple of years, perhaps in the next 5 years, then the impact of this agreement will be significantly felt across all of the countries of the African region. So the SADC region, the ECOWAS region, all of the north, the eastern part, it is the essence of the agreement is to eliminate unnecessary dominance of individual populated countries over the other in a way that it can create a free and a mutually beneficial relationship across all the member states.
Now, I believe that there are some certain rules of origin, rules of engagement for the AfCFTA trade to commence. What exactly are they? What are countries supposed to comply with before this free trade agreement is put in place?
Yeah. I think basically one of the things is basically there are rules of engagement. And one of the things that the agreement aims to achieve is basically to mitigate concerns about increased competition, from other African markets. For example, Nigeria has been working to develop policies and initiatives to support local industries. If you give, for example, the federal government set up a committee to review the impact of AfCFTA on the country's economy, and then develop strategies and strategies on how to ensure that local industries remain competitive among themselves. So the rule of engagement basically is to, in a way, not to shut down the SMEs in those regions, but in a way to strengthen them. Like I said, the former, Nigeria export, I can't remember the full name now, Segun Awolowo, was one of who was seconded by the federal government recently to be the secretary of that committee to review, that agreement on the impact, of industries and small growing businesses within the country to ensure that it does not have so much of negative implication. But just as a quick one, if you look at one of the policies or one of the documents signed by the current president Bola Ahmed Tinubu on qualities of doing business, for example, on electricity, that has empowered states and private sectors to be able to generate power across all of the states in Nigeria. That is a major breakthrough that will help this agreement to be able to, foster that kind of unity and be able to create opportunities, economic opportunities, create jobs, both in Nigeria and across, the West African region. Because industries that have been docile, that have not been doing anything because of lack of power, textile industry that have not been doing well, they will automatically be able to be revived in a way that they can begin to function effectively, create jobs, and then it's going to serve the neighboring countries to be able to create that handshake. So the rule of engagement is not for Nigeria, for example, to kill industries in Togo, to kill industries in Benin, but in a way that we can look at our strengths in terms of conducting a SWOT analysis. What are the economic strengths of Nigeria? What are the economic strengths of Benin? What are the economic strengths of Togo? So what we do not have, we have a way to trade among ourselves. What we have capacity to produce, we're able to provide in larger quantity for the neighboring countries, for them not to necessarily import those commodities or those goods from outside of the continent. So it is a way to strengthen each of the countries in terms of our economic strength, and not in any way to sieve them out of business or to kill the small growing businesses or the industries perhaps in those countries. So that is one critical rule of engagement that the agreement seems to achieve.
Okay, now still looking at all of this, you talked about strengthening the economy of different countries, and you also brought about situation in Nigeria. And we saw situations in 2019 where the Nigerian government, I'm going to read it now, argued that the AfCFTA undermined the country's food import substitution policy on local production and consumption. And we saw that in 2019, we saw under President Muhammadu Buhari where the land borders were closed. Eventually it was open, but all of the land borders are still not open as we speak right now. What are your thoughts on the situation there when it comes to land borders and, freedom of expression or freedom of engagement? Because this clearly contravenes the AfCFTA agreement.
Yeah, particularly if you look at Nigeria and look at our borders are very porous. It's not in terms of the number of manpower that we can put in those borders that will help us to be able to mitigate, illegal inflow of illegal goods across all of these neighboring countries. But the use of technologies to be able to monitor and to be able to secure, our territory in a way that, goods and services that are not certified, as part of the goods and services that should be traded across the continent are not smuggled into the country. So, for example, people smuggled in chicken, you call it like, it's not live chicken, maybe it's called frozen chicken into the country, that again is injurious to the health and the safety and the wellness of the people. That should not be encouraged in any way. Because why? If you look at our conditions in terms of our port, Nigerian ports are congested, perhaps over congested. And if you look at the ports in Cotonou and Togo, things move quite faster. So people can decide to move in their ship through Cotonou or through Togo to have things, cleared faster, quicker, and easier, and then move them into the country. So all of that are the issues, that Nigeria was trying to mitigate. That if we decide to open our borders for these guys, they will bring in all manner of goods that are not regulated. However, if we want to do that, then we must be able to strengthen our internal mechanism. And I heard Custom recently said they are trying to digitalize the entire custom process, and it's going to cost us some billions of dollars. So if that can be done, then it makes it a lot easier. Rather than take ship goods through Benin or Cotonou or Togo, then you can bring it into Nigeria, because our port will not be over congested. We should not rely only on Lagos port. We should have all of these rivers dredged and open and have a lot of seaport where all of these transactions can happen. So that was a fear of the president in terms of how these neighboring countries can smuggle in, unaccepted or unregulated goods into the country and then polarize the entire system. But we should adopt the use of technology. We should be able to use technology to make things work faster in a way that we can regulate all of the goods and services that we're going to be trading among ourselves. And largely, if you also go to the north, if you go to areas in Sokoto, for example, the port is so porous that there is no way you can even deploy up to 1 million people to guide the border. There is no way we can do that. So we just have to find a way, to use technology to regulate all of that in a way that, we can prompt the custom if there are contrabands or there are goods coming in that are not properly checked, serially checked with numbers and all of that. So if all of that are done, then it becomes a lot easier. However, we cannot shut the port for too long, because we signed, this agreement that we're going to allow free trade. So it is our own internal arrangement or our internal responsibility to ensure that whatever we need to put in place to mitigate against those things are done quicker, faster, and efficiently, so that trade can go on between us and all the other member states.
Now, Nigeria is just one example. Like maybe you have other countries too, and a situation where you're looking for your own interest for the country, despite what the AfCFTA agreement says. So before we get to that stage, before we get to that industrialization or technology, how do you think this will affect the AfCFTA agreement? Because we're still looking at the progress it has made 2 years after it has been launched.
So let's take a backward integration again, like I said. Let's look at even Nigerian internal market system. You will see a lot of goods moved from the north to the south. A lot of goods moved from the south, to the western part. How well are we regulating those goods? If we have to protect our territory, if we have to ensure that we do things well, we have not even been able to sanitize our internal system and structures. So I give you a quick example. For example, in Kogi State. Kogi State borders about 9 to 10 states in Nigeria. And it's so porous that all manner of goods come into the state and then smuggled out of the state to different parts of the country. We need to begin to develop systems and structures that can address all of the challenges that are surrounding our internal market system, and we have to be able to strengthen them to be able to create that opportunity, that economic activities across all of the state in a way that is mutually beneficial to all the member states. And I cite this as an example because, for example, if you look at the level of insecurity that for Kogi attracts because it borders so many states, it's a bit worrisome. Now, you go to Lokoja, you see all manner of trailer parks. Who is regulating them? Who is monitoring them? Who is looking at the things they are packing? How many of the custom checks do we have in those areas that can efficiently monitor all of the transactions that are happening internally? So if we are not able to sanitize our system internally, our market system, and build a sustainable economy that can help small markets to grow in Nigeria, then we have a problem. Because no matter what we do, we will not be able to totally stop what is going to happen within the regional environment. That might be a major constraint over time. And I think the new administration should focus on that in terms of how they can strengthen small industries, small growing businesses in Nigeria and support all of the markets that are available in a way that we can have that interrelated, economic activities within our market systems that can help us to grow and to be unified. Once that is achieved, it becomes a lot easier for us to now begin to interact and interface with the regional countries that are member states of this agreement and begin to work our modalities in a way that can become mutually beneficial to all of the players within that sector.
Now, one of the major benefits that they say this AfCFTA brings is making Africa become a high competitor in the global world trade. And that's what we're looking at, a situation where, we have more of exports and less of imports, and we have intra-Africa trade, like you rightly said. How exactly can this be established, and what are the potentials of Africa being, a major competitor when you talk about the global world trade?
Yeah, it's very possible. If you look at our population, the population of Africa is quite huge. We are more than 1 billion. In terms of population. So that's, again, it's a bargaining power. And if you look at the populations of, some of the superpowers today who are doing extremely well in terms of, in terms of their market sizes, like China, like India and all of that, we are in that common front. We belong to that same circle, So what we need to just do is for us to be able to harmonize all of the issues that are facing us as a continent. And then we begin to work together to become one. In Africa today, you have the Anglophone, you have the Francophone. You have some who are largely colonized by the French. They had the French colony. Some of them have the English colony. We need to remove all of those background, that setting in a way that we can begin to align together to see ourselves as one continent. And then we can now work on that front to say, how do we move forward as a continent to achieve a common goal? We are talking about having a single exchange rate, a single currency swap, and all of that. These have been in the pipeline for years. Like I said, the former president of Liberia, late President Muammar Gaddafi, these are one of the things he works towards, Egypt and all of that. But there's so much influence from the West in terms of how we do our business. If you look at what China has done, there are so many of the countries that are indebted to China, and the sovereignty of those countries are totally, in danger because of the exposure of those countries. Even Nigeria is not left out. If you look at our exposure in terms of our debt portfolio, foreign debt portfolio at this moment, that is quite huge. So our sovereignty is in question. If not something is not done quickly to mitigate against it. So the overall objective in terms of the opportunities it tends to bring to the continent is, first of all, to increase our economic growth, to also the integration across the continent, and additionally to establishing a single continental market for goods and services. Meaning that if we have a single market, we can now trade with the likes of Europe, we can trade with the likes of Asia, we can trade with the likes of America as a block. And then development will come into the continent as a block. It's not a situation where a particular section of the continent is developed, like you have in Rwanda, like you have in Kenya right now. And then other countries are suffering, going down, like you have in South Sudan, still struggling and all of that. That will not help us. So if we're able to achieve that single continental market for goods and services, we're able to have free movement of people from one place to another. You can still imagine now, if you apply for South African visa, you can wait to eternity and not get a visa approved. If it is even approved, they might just give you 1 day. They can give you 10 days. They can give you 5 days. That will not help us. We must be able to move freely and work freely among ourselves. So until we're able to remove all of the bottlenecks, all of the impediments and all of the challenges that are facing us as a continent, there is no way we can interface with the global market as a bloc. So there must be free movement. There must be, we must promote cross-border trade, investment, economic cooperation, among all of us. We must begin to look at an increased competitive, advantage among us. And then we must begin to look at innovation, productivity, and all of that are very essential ingredients to be able to make us a formidable force to be able to engage, globally. Africa is blessed. And if you listen to the African Development Bank President, Addis in Egypt, recently during their annual program, he told us about the capacity of Africa in terms of lithium. We can begin to produce our own battery. If you look at what happened in Nigeria because of the subsidy that was removed, a lot of innovations were coming in. Young Nigerians from Enugu, from Ibadan, from everywhere, are now beginning to convert all of our vehicles, the NAPEBs, the machines, from gasoline to electric, vehicles. That is the kind of innovation we have. Until we are faced with serious problems, we as Africans do not rise to our challenges to solve them. Now we are faced with one. The cost of transportation is so high. Now Nigerians who are innovative are coming up with ideas. It's not like those ideas were not there, but how supportive is the government in encouraging those folks to be able to manufacture and provide for them, in larger quantity where they can help small African countries who do not have the capacity to do that. So we need to look at all of these, increase innovation, remove all of the bottleneck, come as a simple entity to drive productivity, to drive investment, and to also be able to ensure that we remove that cross-border issues where I want to go to Rwanda, I have to apply for visa. I'm going to Kenya, I have to apply for visa. I'm going to South Africa, I have to apply for visa. If we not remove all of that, then we're still deceiving ourselves. So if we're able to do that, it becomes a lot easier for us to negotiate. That as an African, we are not coming to America to obtain visa. It's not going to be easy. So they might need to remove that. Some African countries recently were removed from, I don't know whether you were aware that Canada decided to add some African countries to visa-free countries. Yeah, and
but Nigeria wasn't there.
Nigeria was not there. So why will Nigeria as a country, the largest black race in the world, not be among the people that will go to Canada free of charge?
Definitely.
But Morocco is there, Morocco was added, and few other ones was added to it.
A lot of things that needs to be done for Africa. Thank you so much for this candid points that you've raised. I do hope that these points that have been raised will actually be taken up and we can bring Africa to the limelight that is needed. Thank you so much for your candid thoughts on the situation. Thank you for joining us on One Slot.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that.
And that was Olushiji Aina, is a board member of U.S.-Africa Trade Council. He joins us from Edo, Nigeria. We're looking at the progress of the AfCFTA. And he talked so much about what Africa needs to do, talking about the free movement of people and free trade agreements between African countries. It's not over until it's over. We'll go for a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue with discussions on powering the AfCFTA agreement to, promulgate the Africa dream of having Africa in the forefront. We'll have discussions after the break. Join us again.